My name is Eric Nolan, and I've camped alone for years across the Northwest. I always knew how to take care of myself, but what I saw and survived in Olympic National Forest completely changed how I see nature. It happened last August. I had chosen a quiet spot near the Salduck River, about 7 kilometers from the main road. I set up my tent before sunset and lit a small fire. The forest was calm, filled only with the murmur of the river and the occasional crack of branches swaying in the wind. Around midnight, something woke me up. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but the forest was too quiet. I switched off my headlamp and listened. There was a wet, heavy sound, like something large breathing just outside my tent. I thought it might be a deer or a bear, so I banged a pan to scare it off. Instead of retreating, the sound came closer. The ground vibrated beneath me, followed by the snap of a thick branch. I slipped on my shoes without turning on the light, trying to stay silent. Then, something hit the tent. Hard. Once. Twice. The fabric tore open, and a massive hand, or claw, pushed through the opening. I saw fingers, not paws. Fingers covered in coarse, dark hair. I bolted out of the tent, barefoot, clutching only my pocket knife. My flashlight slipped into the mud, its beam barely cutting through the darkness. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Heavy, uneven, but fast. Whatever it wasn't running like a four-legged animal. It moved like a man. A huge man. The sound of its breathing was so loud it echoed in my skull. I reached a rocky area by the river and crouched behind a fallen log. My flashlight still glowed a few meters away, lying on the ground. The creature approached the light. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Over 8 feet tall, shoulders wide as a doorframe, skin dark beneath a thick coat of matted hair. It wasn't a bear. It picked up the flashlight, studied it for a moment, and crushed it in its hand. It stood still, sniffing the air. It was searching for me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The silence was so complete, I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. When it turned toward the river, I took my chance and dove into the freezing water. The current dragged me downstream for what felt like forever. By the time I crawled out, I was shaking, bleeding from scrapes, and completely lost. At sunrise, I stumbled onto the forest road. The rescue team that found me thought I'd had a breakdown. When they returned to my camp, they found the tent ripped apart, my gear scattered, and enormous footprints all around it. The report said, "bear attack." But bears don't walk on 2 legs. They don't crush flashlights with their hands. And they never make the forest go that silent. Since that night, I've never camped alone again, because deep in Olympic, something watches, and if you ever hear it breathing outside your tent, it's already too late.
I've worked as a park ranger in Olympic National Forest for over 10 years. I've seen massive bears, storms that uproot trees, and hikers on the verge of panic, but nothing prepared me for what happened on the night of September 17th. That afternoon, we received an emergency call. 2 hikers hadn't returned from the Hoh River Trail. The sun was setting and the weather was turning bad, so my partner, Miller, and I took the truck and headed down the route to search for them. About 3 kilometers in, we found the hiker's tent destroyed. It wasn't the work of a small animal. The poles were bent, and the backpacks were torn from top to bottom. On the ground, huge footprints, larger than any grizzly's, sank deep into the wet mud. 5 toes, no claw marks. Miller joked that maybe a tourist brought a Bigfoot costume. I forced a laugh, but it didn't feel funny. We followed the tracks upriver. The forest was unnervingly silent. No insects, no birds, nothing. The fog rolled in so fast we could barely see 5 meters ahead. Then the smell changed, sharp, sour, like rotting meat mixed with iron. That's when we heard it. A low, drawn-out growl. It wasn't a bear. It was deeper. "You heard that, right?" Miller whispered. Before I could answer, something ran between the trees. We didn't see it, but the ground shook. A second later, something hit him. Miller was thrown against a tree, his flashlight rolling across the ground before it went out. I ran toward him, but a massive shadow emerged from between the trunks. The beam flickered, and for a moment I saw it. A figure covered in dark hair, over 7 feet tall, its arms hanging down to his knees. It wasn't a costume. I drew my service weapon and fired into the air. The gunshot echoed through the forest, but the creature didn't flinch. It just stared at me, almost human in its expression, before charging. I ran for the river. I could hear its footsteps behind me, heavy, breaking branches as it came. I plunged into the freezing water and scrambled up the opposite bank. When I looked back, the silhouette was still there, standing at the edge, motionless. It didn't cross. It just watched me until the fog swallowed it whole. We returned with a rescue team at dawn. We found Miller's body near the campsite, his neck broken. The footprints circled him, then vanished into the trees. The official report says bear attack, but it wasn't a bear. The size of those prints, the way it moved, that smell, it's all burned into my mind. And every time I walk along the Ho River, I feel it. Something watching me through the fog. Something that doesn't want us to come back.
I've served as a ranger in Olympic National Forest for 27 years. I've seen wildfires, impossible rescues, storms that seemed alive. But what happened on my last patrol 4 winters ago defies any logical explanation. It was mid-November. The weather was damp, the trails slick, and the forest nearly empty of visitors. I'd been assigned to inspect a remote area north of Lake Quinault where people had reported strange nighttime noises. I went alone. It wasn't the first time, and I always liked that sense of solitude, of having the forest all to myself. For the first few hours, everything looked normal. Fallen branches, deer tracks, a few trees scratched by bears. But as I moved deeper in, I noticed something odd. No birdsong, no buzz of insects, only the sound of my own boots pressing into the wet leaves. Around 5 in the evening, I found a footprint that made me stop cold. It was huge, over 16 inches long, perfectly shaped in the mud. 5 toes. No claw marks, and 2 more prints beside it, parallel, as if someone or something had walked there not long before. I told myself it had to be a prank, a mold, maybe. I took a photo and marked the GPS coordinates. The sun disappeared early, and with it, my radio signal. I decided to camp in a small clearing, built a modest fire, and wrote everything down in my patrol log. Around 9, I heard the first sound, a solid knock against a tree. Then another, farther away, and another, 3 in total. I answered with my regulation whistle, thinking another ranger might be nearby. The forest replied with one more knock, much closer. The air grew heavy, charged with that metallic scent that comes right before a storm, or something worse.
My flashlight caught a brief shape between the trees, tall, broad, covered in dark hair. It walked on two legs. I froze. The fire crackled, and every time the flame flared up, I saw it more clearly, eyes reflecting the light, not red, but yellow, like a wolf's. I grabbed my radio, shouting for backup, but only static came through. Then I heard breathing, deep, wet, right behind me. I bolted for my ATV, the engine roared, and that seemed to anger it. Something hit the back of the vehicle as I sped off. The machine wobbled, but I didn't stop. When I reached the ranger station, the rear frame of the ATV was dented, and caught in the metal was a clump of dark hair. Lab analysis listed it as indeterminate origin. It matched no known mammal in the region. I retired 3 months later. Sometimes I think about going back just to prove what I saw was real. But whenever the fog rolls in and the forest goes silent, I feel it again. That presence, waiting. And I know that if I step back into Olympic, I won't come out again.
My name is Tom Harris, head of rescue operations in Olympic National Forest. In 15 years of service, I've led over 100 missions, lost hikers, injured climbers, missing campers. But the search for the Fisher case in October 2019 was different, very different. Fisher was a wildlife photographer who vanished near Lake Crescent in the northern part of the park. The last message he sent his sister read, "Something's following me. It's not a bear." Then, silence. 5 of us went out with full packs, GPS units, and radios. The weather was gray, a heavy mist creeping up from the valley like a slow tide. We found his campsite by midday on the second day. The tent was collapsed, gear scattered. There were drag marks and a broken camera nearby. The last photo stored showed a dark forest, and among the trees, a tall, blurred figure, barely visible. We followed a trail uphill. The footprints were deep, wide, and barefoot. We tried to rationalize it. Optical illusions, distorted soil. No one said it aloud, but we were all thinking the same thing. That wasn't a bear. By dusk, the fog grew thick. We decided to set camp near a creek. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, just the sound of water and our own unease. Around 3 in the morning, Richards, one of the rookies, stepped out of his tent saying he'd heard heavy footsteps behind the camp. We told him it was branches falling. He didn't believe it. Minutes later, we heard him scream. I rushed out with my flashlight and tranquilizer rifle. The trees were shaking violently, and something huge ran past me, fast enough to stir the air. I didn't see it clearly, just a shadow, immense and upright, broader than any man. We found Richards moments later. He was lying on the ground, chest torn open. The wounds were too wide, too deliberate for claws. They looked like they'd been made by hands. No one spoke. We packed up in silence and started heading down. Halfway back, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the forest. Thud, thud, thud. Then came a deep growl that made the air vibrate. "Move!" I yelled. Branches snapped behind us under heavy, deliberate steps. We never saw it, but we could feel it closing in. When we finally reached the truck, only 3 of us were left. Our local guide had vanished somewhere along the descent. The official report mentioned extreme conditions and an attack by unidentified wildlife. No further investigation was made. Weeks later, the guide's body surfaced in the lake, pale, cold, and completely drained of blood.
I never set foot in Olympic again. But sometimes when the wind blows from the north, I swear I can still hear that same hollow sound echoing through the trees. Thud, 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 as if it's still out there, looking for us.